1 in 3 is intended for mature audiences. Episodes contain explicit content and may be triggering as they often include violence and other varying forms of abuse such as emotional, psychological, sexual, and physical. In most cases, names have been changed to protect all involved. Please note, statements and opinions of guests do not necessarily reflect those of my own. Hi, Warriors. Welcome to 1 in 3. I'm your host, Ingrid. Reporting your abuser to the police is incredibly intimidating for so many reasons. And one of the biggest questions survivors have is, what if they post bail? Today, we're diving into that question and talking about what bail agents across the country are putting in place to help protect victims. Joining me today is the president of the Professional Bail Agents of the United States, David Stuckman. Hi, David. Welcome to 1 in 3. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Well, thank you. I'm glad to be here.
I am glad to have you here. And before we get talking about all of the exciting stuff we have, could you just let us know a little bit about yourself?
Well, I'm the president of the Professional Bail Agents of the United States. I represent probably around anywhere from 10 to 15,000 bondsmen and nationwide. I've been a bondsman for over 35 years. And before I was a bondsman, I was a bounty hunter. And before that, I was an insurance investigator. And I live in Manhattan, Kansas. Go K-State Wildcats. And I am a father of two lovely children. One is a pharmacist here in Manhattan in my hometown. And the other one is a psychologist in Greeley, Colorado. She works, she's in a rehab center working with people with their addictions and working that out.
Wow, that's tough work.
Yep, that's tough for her. And she has two beautiful grandchildren that I don't get to see enough.
Yeah, isn't that the story? That's what my parents always say too.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think a lot of people are probably aware of what a bondsman or bail agent is, but just to make sure everybody knows exactly what we're talking about, do you mind just letting us all know exactly what you do?
Okay. Well, when a person has made a bad choice and gets arrested, then he has the option to post bond, and the bail bond is set by the judge. He sets the bond. But you can post the bond yourself in cash. Your family and friends get money together and come and bond you out. But sometimes it's very high and cost prohibitive. So then the bondsman can be called and help them get them out. It's usually a 10% fee, and that's non-refundable. If they put up all the cash themselves, eventually they get all that money back. When you use a bondsman, it's a 10% fee. It's an insurance premium is what it is. Once you have post that bond, that money's not refundable. And then if you don't show up in court, the bondsman has to come and arrest them. But we try to help everybody get back on track. The goal of the bondsman is to get people out and try to get them to where they will readjust in life. I don't know how to explain it. I always tell them this, society knows we all make mistakes. We've all made mistakes, and all society wants us to do is to pay for our mistakes, make sure we do that. And that's our job, is to help them do that. And sometimes I have a partnership with one brother and one sister, which helps us place people in rehab centers for addictions or whatever. And because we all take these classes at PBUS, we're HIPAA approved. So we can communicate with the rehab centers and tell the judges, because usually what happens, we bond them out right there and we check them into the centers right away. Then we have to go to the court and tell the judge, Your Honor, we bonded him out. Yes, we did, but we put him in a rehab center. We're trying to get him some help. And then the judge say, okay, well, when do you think he'll be out? And I says, well, will be in communication with the center and I'll give you an update. And when he gets out, we'll get him into court. And that really helps the individual, because it shows that he regrets what he did. He's trying to get himself back on, or herself back on track. And it really helps them when it comes time for sentencing, when they get a diversion or when they're adjudicated in any way. That's what we do.
Is there a maximum amount of bail that you can't get involved in, or you guys can get
Well,
involved anytime?
let's say it's $1 million bond because that would sound like maximum. We've posted a few of those $1 million bonds, but when we do that, we have to have collateral from the family, and it's usually like a farm or $1 million house in equity, and we have to provide proof that we've done that so the court knows that we have it collateralized. And if something does go wrong, we screw up, then we literally have to pay the million out of our pocket, and not very many bondsmen can do that. So we're very, very, uh, um, we want to make sure everything is perfect on that to make sure we have the mortgage, and that's the leverage. Because when the son or and it's usually the parents that put up that kind of property, but when the son or the daughter know that their family's going to lose their house, they're going to obligate. They may have to go to prison. When $1 million bond's involved, usually that individual has to go to prison, and so that helps that because the family does not have to put up that collateral and he stays in jail. But yeah, we've posted him, and we have to go to the court and talk to the judge and say we're going to post this bond and this is what we have. And the judge lots of times want to say, well, I want to talk to the family and make sure they understand as well as they should. And so it takes a little bit more time to get a big bond like that. And usually there's a death involved, a tragic fatality or something like that. The last one I did is the guy had fentanyl and distributed it. I don't know that he was sold it or whatever, and somebody died. And he ended up going to prison for, I don't know, it was 280 months. But the family, realizing he was going to do that, wanted to spend the last 8 or 9 months with him and be emotionally supportive of him. And then when that happened, truthfully, what happened there is then when he knew he was going to prison, we helped him prepare for prison. I went in and this was my bond, by the way. I went in, I talked with him, and I said, okay, when you get there, these are some of the steps, and I want you to meet. And I introduced him to an individual that had just gotten out of prison to give him the ins and outs of prisons, what to do and what not to do. And we're not going to get into that here, but one of the things is you can have an iPod or an iPad and communicate with your family while you're in prison. And that just really made it easier for him to, well, as long as I can be in communication with my family, I think I can survive this. And I didn't have no choice because he was going to go. But there was other things, the do's and don'ts, and I don't think that's prudent to this. I don't want to get into that. It's too gory.
Okay. And then I guess alleged, because they're not convicted of anything, right? So do they find you or do you find them?
Well, what everybody doesn't understand, and when they talk about the bail bond business, is 90% of the money and the people and everything, it comes from the outside. We'll get a phone call from the individual lots of times, and I'll say, okay, I need to talk to your family, your friends, or whoever is going to be held accountable for this. But I need you to call them first. Or I'm going to tell them to call the jail to verify you're in here. Because there's so many scams out there right now where they'll say they're bondsmen and this and that. And we're really doing a campaign right now as we speak with the PR team to notify the public so they know how it works. But we would like for the defendant to call the family and say, I'm in jail, at least tell them that so they know. And these are small bonds. Let's say it's just a DUI or whatever. But then I will call the family or the family will call me. I would prefer them to call me because I feel that's what they have the choice of any bondsman. There's lots of bondsmen in my hometown right here. So they can pick and choose whoever they want. And then they call and then we make the arrangement. But I would say 90% of the time, the family puts up the money. Very seldom does the actual person in jail put up his own money. He can pay them back when he gets out, but we want the money and everything and all our paperwork signed before he walks out of the jail.
Okay. And then, so you were a bounty hunter, you said before. So is that what led you to want to do this?
Well, I was a private investigator and I did investigations and and I did it for insurance companies, but as the investigator, he also had a bonding company and he needed a bounty hunter. So I said, look, you're going to make more money as a bounty hunter than you will as his PI. And he was right. And then I just said, no, I want to be a bondsman. I want to help people. I don't mind chasing people and catching the bad guys, but I would get more gratification helping people out at the start and make sure I don't have to chase that many people. Let's make sure that they show up in court and do this. So that's how that evolved.
Just so everyone knows, what goes into training to become a bondsman, or what kind of education do you
Yeah.
need?
You do an apprenticeship. You go through and you work with a bondsman, and usually it's clerical, and you learn the ropes. You have to get in the state of Kansas. You have to take continuing education. It's an 8-hour course every year, but every state is different. Now those are state regulations, and I have to maintain an insurance license. It's a specific bail bond license through the insurance commissioner, and you would have to do that. You'd have to get your license, then you have to get the continuing education, and then usually your general agent, which that's what I am, will help you work through the cracks of the problems and everything, and train you. And it usually takes, before I really think a bondsman really feels like they know what they're doing, it takes about a year, okay, to really feel like and then of course they could go work on their own if they want, and stuff. But yeah.
Well, so this is a domestic violence podcast. So, of course, a lot of people who are listening are either victims, survivors, or family members or friends of somebody who is a victim or survivor. So, when it comes to domestic violence, are there any specific precautions that you guys take?
Well, yes, and each state is different when you talk about state laws. But when I've got a domestic violence, it really is a little different can of worms, because you've got a victim, and the first thing we do is, that's when we really want to talk to the family, as we said it before. We want to hear what they think, and there's a lot of times when I call the family and I said, well, he's in jail. He wants to get out, and he said, you'll sign for him. And I'm talking mother, father, brother, whatever. Oh, no, this is not a good idea. He can be dangerous. And I don't think his wife would be safe and feel safe. There's no contact, but that's a piece of paper. Then when I hear that, I think, okay, well, obviously we're not going to write the bond. And I think that's where you're alluding to. And I say, well, okay, I can tell him that, but probably I should say that you guys don't qualify as co-signers or whatever, because I'm sure you don't want him to know that you're refusing to bond him out, because you got to deal with this individual the rest of your life, and he's going to hold this against you. You wouldn't get me out of jail. And they said, oh, thank you. Sometimes they say, please don't tell him we did that. And so the bondsman has to take the bullet on that, or he has to take the blame and everything. We tell him, no, you don't qualify, or you're going to need to go directly into rehab if it works out that way. And then, because if I call the victim, she's not going to, or I'm assuming it's a wife, let's say, she's not wanting him out. But usually when I'm talking to the defendant before I even call the family, I'm going to say, are you going to get a divorce because of this? Oh, no, I'm not going to do. I can tell by his attitude, usually, this guy is a control freak. This is probably a bad relationship, and there is going to be a divorce. He just doesn't know it. And so there's a lot of things that play into it. And we're human. We listen. I'm a victim of family violence when I was a kid. So I'm very, very emotional about it, and empathetic, and everything about the situation when I talk to people, me personally.
So, like, the judge is supposed to take into consideration previous offenses and things like that before they are determining whether this person qualifies for bond or not. Is that anything that you look into as well? Or do you just kind of go from this, the judge says that this is an okay thing?
Yeah, they have what they call a bond schedule. And if it's the first time he's ever been arrested, it's not that really of a big bond. And usually when it is that way, that's when I find out, look, is this a one-time deal? Was there stress at home? Did he lose his job? What are we fighting over money out matters? And if it's something like that, then they can get into help. They don't necessarily need to get in treatment. Maybe they need to just get into go see their preacher, go see their pastor, go anybody, and talk through this and figure out how to get through the tough time there. But if they've been arrested 3 or 4 times, then yeah, the judge does take that in consideration, and that's when we really we pay attention to, because we sure don't want any more problems, anybody hurt. You got children involved. Lots of times it's just a landmine, and the bondsman really has to pay attention to try to do the right thing. And when we do post a bond, there's only two people that can put conditions on a bond. The judge can put a condition, this and that, and so can a bondsman. And the bondsman can put a condition on their mom and dad, said, well, I'll bond him out if he promises to stay away from these people. Okay, that's a condition on the bond. If he is, we'll arrest him and put him back in jail, and I'll make sure he understands that. Or he stays out of the bars, or he can't drink. Well, yeah, we can make that a condition. Lots of times the judges do that, but we can reiterate that condition. Or he's got to get a job. He's got to go find a job. Okay. If he's totally depressed and can't find a job, what are we going to do about that? As long as he's looking, we'll be there for emotional support and try to help him find a job and things like that. That's what we can do in that circumstance there. The judges don't, they just set a bond. They can't be, they have to be impartial, because they've heard what the prosecutors brought forth of them. Well, he did this and this and this. And then if the person has an attorney, he's going to say, well, this is an exaggeration. And the judge does that. But he can't really talk to the individual like the bondsman can. I can sit there, go to the jail, sit in the cell with him right there and say, okay, let's talk about it. Let's work this out. How are you going to fix this? How are you going to make sure this doesn't happen again? And lots of times they're really remorseful. Well, they're really remorseful when they're in jail, because all they're thinking about is, I just want out of here. The other thing you got to take into consideration when you're putting this bond, is he going to lose his job? Because that is how the family survives, is off his job. If he loses his job, now stress has even got more intense, because now, so lots of times we bond him out just to save his job. If he gets arrested on a, the funny thing about domestic violence, that I don't really have the stats in front of me. One of the times that is really a peak season is the Sunday after Thanksgiving. There is a lot of there's usually, I'll say the Sunday after like a 3-day weekend or something like that. But Thanksgiving seems to be the most stressful, because the family gets together, and by the time Sunday, their nerves are stretched as far as, you know what I mean? And they just snap, and then there's a fight, and then this and that. But that is one of the peaks. And the same thing is the Sunday after Christmas too. That's another stressful time and stuff, because it's that time, and a lot of alcohol is consumed and stuff like that. A lot of times I will hear, he's just a mean drunk. Well, then he should quit drinking. Anybody that's been called a mean drunk, he or she needs to realize that it's probably time to give up drinking. And my stepdad beat me when I was a kid, and he was a mean drunk, but nobody intervened back in I'm telling you my age. I was in the 60s when I was a kid, and my mom married a man, and he was very violent. She was my mom, and as well to me. I used to take beatings for my little sister, because that was just the big brother thing to do. She was 3 years younger than me, and she'd screw up, and I'd say, no, I did that. And I'd get, I'd get whippings all the time. And it was with his preference was the belt. He'd use the belt. And I used to hate that. But, and he beat my mom too. I mean, it was terrible. We ran and hid from him several times, but back then we didn't have the help that we have available today. There was no intervention people. When there's domestic violence in most states, there is a group of people they can call and get help. And lots of times the police will have the victim they'll send somebody to the victim and say, you want to talk about this? Here's your rights. Here's what you can do. I'm sure you know about all that, Ingrid, with your podcast, but those people are important. And in most states, the person cannot get out of jail until the victim is notified.
Okay.
And yeah, that is probably one of the best things to have available. And there's lots of times when the indemnitors and the people are at the jail with me, and we're trying to bond them out. What's taking so long? What's taking so long? And I'd usually say, well, they're probably trying to notify the victim, and she may not want to take the phone call. So then lots of times they'll just send an officer over and say, no, we want you to know he's getting out of jail. And so they're aware of it. And that's a good law to have in every
Yeah.
state.
Do you know how much time, or does that vary per case?
It does vary.
Okay.
If I've got a person that got arrested on Sunday night and everybody says, well, he needs to be at work, he's on probation as it is. If he misses work, he's going to lose his job. So then we try to hustle around and do it, and we can do it. I mean, the jail's open 24/7, so we can bond him out. But there's lots of times I don't get him out until like sometimes just barely before he can just change clothes and go to work.
In the instance of domestic violence, do you personally, or do you just in general as bondsmen, does anyone try to give any additional support information to victims, or does law enforcement, for instance, if a police officer goes to notify that their offenders being released,
Yeah.
do they offer?
We talk to the victim. It's usually fact finding and make sure, okay, is this going to be, we want to make sure we got all the parameters, we got all these conditions and everything. We want to make sure we do that right. And if they ask, well, where can where can I go? Can I go to a homeless shelter? This and that. Well, he's not allowed around your house, and he says, I don't trust that. Then okay, well we'll put up some more things. We'll talk like that, but we can't really tell the victim what to do. That we're here for the bond to bond the person out. And our job is to make sure he stays away from her, and and he follows the rules and the conditions. But if the what'll happen is, you know, what'll happen is the victim will come back, well, it's my fault. No, it's not your fault. If somebody hits a woman, I don't care. It's always the person that swung. He did not have to do that. There's other things. Even verbal abuse can be ugly, you know. So it's not their fault. And that's the first thing I'll say. Okay, I'm not going to get into this but you need to talk to somebody. And I usually tell them, do you go to church? Yep, call your preacher. And that they don't cost anything. They're there to help you. If you don't have a church, go down the street and find a church. Walk into church and tell you if you want to talk to somebody. Every uh, uh, if you're Catholic, they're not going to turn an individual that's Jewish away. They're going to get the help. And trust me, all you know, every Baptist pastor knows every Methodist minister, and every Methodist minister knows every Catholic priest, and every Catholic priest knows every rabbi. They all know each other, and they'll communicate, and they'll get them help that way. So there is a lot of help because they may not want to bring in the family, and they don't want their friends to know. But there is people out there that they can reach out that it won't cost anything. Now, if they have the capability of getting to a psychologist and getting some therapy, and well, that's great too. But yeah, don't I can't urge enough that there is help out there, and the police will provide help, and they'll give a list of numbers too. I have that list. I don't give it out. I don't want to. That's the police's job. I don't want to say it like that, but what I'm saying is I'll let them do their, and I'll stay in my lane and take care of the defendant, and they'll get her help. And usually they want to talk to her anyway because they want to make sure that that person does feel safe. And I have had a lot of times when the police come to me and says, this gal is really nervous or really giddy. She may leave town. And then, of course, the police, I said, well, okay, I can't stop that. And he says, you don't understand. If she leaves town, we've lost our witness. And I go, well, then you do your job and I'll do mine. I'm going to make sure he shows up in court. So you need to make sure that she has someone she can talk to. I've had that happen last 3 or 4 times the last year. And they did lose the case because she moved back with her mom and never come back to the state of Kansas.
Yeah, and I will say that's a lot of pressure to put on a victim to actually go back to court and face the person that's been abusing them. And a lot of times, victims do end up withdrawing their
Yeah.
you know what I'm trying to say,
Yeah.
or
Well,
even not showing up. Yeah.
As a bondsman, I will tell them that's intimidation of a witness. You can't do that. And they say, well, no, you don't understand. Intimidation of witness can be, please don't do this because I'll get a record. I'll do this. Please don't do this to me. Please. That's still intimidation. I don't care how hard they beg. They're still trying. And I tell them, you do that, that's intimidation of a witness and you'll get arrested again. And they go, oh, okay. Because that was the thought that they were going through their mind. And I said, yeah, and don't email them. Don't email their friends. Don't do anything like that because the police will track that and they'll put you in jail. I don't have the capability of doing that, but the police do. and they're going to protect the victim. That's their job. My job is to make sure that you show up in court and make sure you don't cause anybody else harm. And the system works when it worked like that. Now, there's a lot of people out there promoting pretrial release, and they shouldn't have to post a bond. They're innocent until guilty. But all they do, that's just algorithms. It's just numbers. They don't do the research. They don't find out. If you talk to a pretrial release person, so this guy was arrested for domestic battery. Did you know that he had lost his job? No. Did you know that he has beaten a gal 2 or 3 times before? No. Why not? Didn't talk to anybody. They don't know. It's just numbers. They just and the defendant is not the victim. Like I said, if he's hit a woman, he's not a victim. He's broken and he needs to be fixed, but he's not a victim. And that probably upsets me more when I hear people promoting you're innocent until proven guilty. You know, when people get arrested, they may not be guilty of aggravated battery or whatever, but they're guilty of something. The police just don't arrest people just for the fun of it. Now, you'll hear another thing that's been said lots of times. When the police are called, somebody's going to jail. Well, that is something I've heard here more frequently lately, is the police says, well, if we're called, we're going to take somebody to jail. Now, when I hear that, then maybe they were arguing and the neighbor said something. Well, then they should investigate that thing. Did you hit her? No. Did he hit you? No. Did you? No, no. We just argue. We're the last one I had is it was a, well, and I'm not trying to put a culture in there. And they said, we're hot-blooded Italians. This is the way we work things out is we argue. And I go, well, has he ever hit it? You know, then if he's never hit you, then he said, no, it's our nosy neighbors. But the deal is, it was really interesting talking to him. And I could tell she would irritate me the way she talked. I thought, whoa, man, then he says, that's the way Italians are. That's how we settle our differences. I go, okay. But anyway, the neighbors called, he got arrested, and we promptly bonded him out. No contact with the victim, you know, and stuff. And he went and stayed with his brother. But I saw them later on. That's when they said that, you know, that's how we work things out. But the judge didn't know, you know, and I think the guy got a diversion. I don't remember what happened to that particular case. But yeah, that somebody's going to jail. They need to really, I would be okay with advocating a different situation there. Now, in the old days, the reason they did that is the police would be called. They come there and he said, if I have to come back here, I'm going to arrest somebody. And what happened in a few states, and I think it even happened in Kansas, they didn't get the call to come back to break it up. They come back because the wife was dead. He killed her. So that promoted the idea we've got to take further actions. And that happened back I think it was in the 90s. The one here in Kansas, I remember, wasn't here, but I remember when it happened. I thought, oh yeah, I could see that happening too. But that was a one-time deal. But yeah, I think that could be tweaked. But I'm all for protecting the victim and getting the defendant help, and every marksman is.
Well, and there are a few things that I wanted to touch on that you mentioned. One is offenders will always somehow make it a way that they are a victim in the situation. Like, oh, I wouldn't have done that if he or she hadn't done this first, or if they didn't make me think this way. But I also wanted to say that I appreciate that you recognize intimidation can be, I promise I won't do it again. We need to make this work out. You know, let's stick together for the family. All of those excuses, those are forms of intimidation. And those are some of the reasons why victims will drop their charges against their offenders.
They've been convinced.
Yes.
I'm the one. No. And I can't emphasize that enough. I hope the thing of it is with violent people, I would say, there's a lot of people says, well, we don't have anything like that. Yeah, there's somebody in the family. There's a black sheep in the family. There's somebody that they'll say, you don't want to be around him when he's been drinking. And then it's usually alcohol is what I'll say. And then I say, okay, well, that's the person that's going to be one that we're going to be bonded out of jail someday and stuff. And then Well, when I tell him he shouldn't drink, I'm using an example. When I tell him he shouldn't drink, that's a trigger. That's a trigger. Now we, or whatever, because now he's mad. You're telling me what to do, this and that. Don't tell me what to do. And then there goes the violence. And she didn't do anything wrong. She's trying to help him. She's trying to get him, please don't drink, whatever. And it's not her fault. I want to make sure that every victim that is watching and listening to your show, they understand it's not their fault.
Yeah. And I try to emphasize that almost every episode. I wanted to go back and talk about bail for a second. When you're spending time with the offender, and then if you do have the opportunity to speak with the victim or even the victim's family, do you ever come upon the conclusion of maybe this person shouldn't get out at all? And are you able to talk to the judge about, are they ever able to revoke that once it's been ruled, or how would that work? If
Judge, you're always got the right to post a bond, but when the family won't help, I'm not going to bond a stranger out. Okay, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to have some character references, and I'll tell them that, because and then you learn to word these questions when you're talking to the defendant to where he can't get out. Let me give you an example. I'll say, well, okay, how long you lived here? I've lived here all my life. Okay, all right. Where's your mom and dad? They're not around. Well, where are they? They're I don't know where they are. We're okay. That's a flag. That's a flag. Okay, well, give me a list of 3 or 4 of your friends that I can talk to as characteristics. I don't know anybody. You've lived in this town all your life. See where I'm going? I've already made sure I paved my road. You've lived here all your life and you don't have any friends. Well, I don't want to be your friend then, because I don't even know you, and you're trying to get me to be your friend and bond you out. No, I'll pass. And bondsmen always have the right to pass. Well, I got the money. Well, I don't. That's not it. Because I got to sleep at night, and if I find out I bonded you out and you go and beat your wife again, I'm not going to sleep very good, and I'm going to be worried that you're going to do that. So no, I don't think so. I'll pass. And then they're upset at the bondsman. And then lots of times, all bondsmen know each other. I'll put out an email, or we have, a lot of us have chat rooms. I'll just say, this individual, this is what my encounter is. Do what you wish. And usually he won't get out, because the bondsman goes, well, I ain't gonna. If David Stuckman's not bonding him out, and he's already interviewed him, when I get the call, I'll ask the same questions, and lots of times he will tweak his story some way other, because then we talk about it later on. He says, yeah, now he says this or whatever. The chat room's chiming now because he's just going down the list calling people. So the bondsmen do, we'll all get in a foot race to run down and write a bond, beat the other one, elbow, whatever, get there before the other guy does, because it's the competitive business. But we also know that the right thing needs to be done. And that's what bondsmen want to do, is the right thing. We are very humanistic, and we do have feelings for the victims and stuff. And we try to do the best we can to make sure. We would love to see recidivism drop drastically. If it's a first-time arrest, then we really do put a lot more effort into it, because we can turn this person around. We can do a lot. I've got several speeches that I use on these guys, and I'll have the jail call me and says, David, you need to give him the fork in the road speech. And this is usually a juvenile. Maybe he beat up his girlfriend. We're going to stay with domestic violence, and this and that. And I'll say, okay, fork in the road. And what that is, I say, well, I need the mom there. The mom is my best weapon for this. And I'll tell the mom, okay, now listen, I'm going to tell him we're going to try to change his right now. But I'm going to tell you, you're going to be crying when this is all done. And she says, well, anything to get him out. And then I'll tell him, let me tell you something, buddy. You're at the fork of your life in the road. Either you're going to go to prison, and you won't survive in prison. You're not big enough. You're going to be somebody's little girlfriend, or you're going to turn your life around right now. And you need to really realize it. I said, your parents love you very much, or they wouldn't be here. Your mom loves you very much. They're not proud of you right now. They're not proud of you at all. And your mom is embarrassed. And about that time's when the tears start coming, the mom starts crying because it gets emotional and everything. And I can look him square in the eye and I say, do you look at your mom? You did this to your mother. And I really get, and if he starts crying or he breaks down and everything, I know that I've got it. I've got him. Now I just got to get him right. So how are we going to fix this? Do you want to go to treatment? Whatever. Because I'm going to tell you, I don't believe you. I think you're a liar. I think you're full of whatever. And I'll tell you what I'll do. If you stay out of trouble for the next 5 years, I'll buy you the biggest steak dinner in Manhattan, Kansas. And I usually say, I'll buy you and your mom and your dad the biggest steak dinner meal. It's on me. But I'm so confident it won't happen. I'm not worried about having to spend the money. Now, to this day, I will get a phone call from somebody out of the clear blue. You owe me a steak dinner, and then he's telling all, and I go, really? Then I let him tell. Then I feel like I've made a success out of this. Okay. Me and my wife, we patched up. Sometimes they get divorced, but they'll say whatever. And we got children. I got a great job. My life is great. And then it's an affirmation. And I've probably done that. I'll say maybe in the last 4 or 5 years, maybe 12 times. I'm trying to think all the time. But I'll tell you one thing. I have never bought a dinner. You want to know who buys that dinner? Mom and Dad.
I was going to say mom and dad. Yeah.
I'll say, send me the bill. I don't want to be there. Send me the bill. Tell mom and dad, send me the bill and I'll pay it. Nah. Because usually after he calls, I'll say, well, you got a steak dinner. And they said, oh, thank you. And then they're all happy and everything. So that's when you know you've made a success. That always makes me feel good as a bondsman, knowing that I've done something to help get somebody back on track. And that's just the feeling that makes you glad you're a bail bondsman.
Yeah, and it's nice to know that there's bail bondsmen that are working toward that goal too. So about bail, what are the different types? Because there are different types of bail.
Well, like I said, there is what they call the cash or surety. Now, if the judge doesn't think a bondsman is going to help this guy, he can make it a cash-only bond. Now, usually those cash-only bonds is because it's court costs and fines, and that's what if he's failed to appear, the judge will say, okay, it's a such and such cash-only bond. That bond is because he owed the money. It may not, he may have already done the time, but he still owes money. Now, it's usually like a probation violation. A probation violation bond is they put him on probation. He violated probation, so they're going to arrest him again and try to they may send him to prison. So that's a probation bond. Then there's the cash and surety, whichever. Then there's an OR bond. It's somebody that's that always shows up in court, and the judge doesn't feel he needs to post the bond, and that's on a reconnaissance, which can be personal, a PR, personal reconnaissance, but OR, but no bondsman's involved there. And then there is I've lost track. Then the bonds are like aggravated. Anytime you hear the word aggravated, that's a felony. That's a felony bond. So if you hear aggravated domestic battery, first of all, when I hear that as a bondsman, I say, okay, I got to get my pencil out and take some really good notes, because what was the weapon? What was it? What did he do? Now, if he beat her up because he's so much bigger and beat her to a pulp, I'm not really excited about writing a bond on a guy that's done that. If he's grabbed a bat or there's a gun involved or things like that, that tells me he's a dangerous person. And again, when you bond out dangerous people like that, we just had a bondsman last week in Alabama that was going to make a simple arrest, and he got shot and killed. So bondsmen, when we write the bond, when I see a dangerous person, I really have to pay attention, because I want to make sure that I don't have to be chasing a guy that's going to go around shooting people. He may not shoot the bondsman, but he may shoot an innocent bystander or run over somebody. Fleeing and eluding is a thing that we worry too, because if he flees and eludes from the police, next time he may flee and elude and run over somebody, and then we don't need that. So we're very careful. I would say that I turn down more bonds than I approve, because I have agents call me, and the ones I turn down are the bigger bonds. Or I don't necessarily turn them down. I say, I'll write these bonds, but these are the conditions I want met. I want this and this and this and this before we'll even consider bonding him out. And lots of times it comes down, he needs treatment, and lots of the times we want that treatment so far away from Manhattan, Kansas, if it's here, to where his enablers don't come and visit him, because then he's not getting the help he gets. If I take somebody from here, and one of the places I would send him to is Jupiter, Florida. It's in Florida. It's a great center. It's so far away, his enablers are not going to take the trip and see him. So they really can focus on his treatment. Plus, if he decides, I'm leaving, he don't even know where he is. I mean, he has no friends or anything. So it keeps him there. But then I have to go to the judge because the judge says, I really don't like the idea of him leaving the state. But I'll say, well, judge, by doing it this way, I've got bondsman up there. If he not escapes, it is a gated community, but if he gets away, I've got bondsman right there that'll find him. I mean, he's going to not have any money. He's going to have this and that. And usually the judge will say, okay. And plus, it's kind of out in the area where he'd have to walk 2 miles before you get to a road that he could get to. So that's one of my favorite places. And that's one brother and one sister that helps me. That partnership with them has really worked very well. We probably pay, I'll say we place somebody nationwide 4 or 5 a week somewhere. It's very good. I'm here in Manhattan, Kansas, and with the domestic violence, nothing against our soldiers, nothing against the military at all, but they have a lot of stress too, and it was really predominant right after the war. So with the military, we have a lot of people that have that problem, but the VA has really great programs. It doesn't matter if they're dishonorably discharged; they have great benefits for helping people with domestic violence.
So I know you're in Kansas, but are you familiar with any laws nationally that seem to be working, or anything that you would say this is something that it would be great if this could be a national?
Yeah. I do like the no contact order. I think that's a great idea. I do like notifying the victim. Now that I don't know if there is any state that doesn't have that. I sent you a sheet of all the laws. If we go through there and find, we need to probably get those people involved and get the notifying the victim. That way they know they're out. The interesting thing, I just was at a conference down at Fort Lauderdale last week, and there's a GPS bracelet they put on so they can track where the individual is. That's a great thing. But it also has a tool that if the GPS bracelet gets real close to the victim's cell phone, let's say they go not knowing each other and they go to the movies. Let's say they're going to the movies or the mall or whatever. And it says, okay, he's within this amount. Well, we can't call him and tell him you got to leave because all I got is the bracelet. But she's alerted. And if they're at the movie, then she can call and say, I don't know where he is, but I just got a warning. Now, I think that's a great tool. I'm excited to see how that really works. I guess it's been out for a while, and I just, with the modern technology and stuff, I think that's a great device. Because let's say he does go to the mall and she goes to the mall. He doesn't know she's there. She's there. But the movies is the one where I've heard that. He went to the movie. She went to the movie. Not necessarily the same movie, but in the same theater. So that's interesting. So I like that idea. But that's just the modern technology anymore that we can keep an eye on. I hope that catches on.
So is that something that's actually in place now?
Or I'm sure it is. I just hadn't, when I went to this convention, I was involved in being the president of PBUS. It was a state convention in Florida. So I was interviewing with all those people, and I didn't really get a chance to sit at that booth and talk to these guys. But I'm going to research a little more and see. I've got a convention coming up here next week in Vegas, and that same group of people, those vendors are going to be there. I'm going to sit down and talk with them then and try to think I think that's a great idea, truthfully.
So as the president of the association, is that something that you can talk to other agents throughout different states and say, hey, this is something that you guys should really consider?
Yeah. The PBUS has another group, part of my association we have a council of presidents. Every state association has a president. So we all meet once a month and we talk. Right now we're talking about other things, but yeah, yes, we do. And probably the next time I have one, I'm going to ask them, does anybody have any laws that they want to share with us? When we did our pre-interview, you asked me, that's exactly the group of people. I said, give me your state laws, give me the updates. Let's get this to Ingrid so she has that. And we had 2 great tools. I knew about them, but I just wanted them to be involved in case there was any new laws coming. And there is no laws that I know right now about domestic violence that they're changing. But there is a lot of laws being passed about bail, but I don't think not necessarily in domestic violence.
One thing that I would think would be cool, so if you want to take this, is just to to perhaps require, I know there's continuing education, also varies probably state to state on what's required, but maybe a course on domestic violence and just understanding all of the different intricacies. And like I said, I appreciate you recognizing what intimidation can be, but somebody else may not recognize that that is a form of intimidation. But I mean, in the state of Tennessee, they have a required continuing education for anybody who works in the beauty industry, that they have to take a domestic violence course so that they recognize that a lot of victims talk to the
Ah,
person who cuts their hair every
right.
single month, and
That is a
so
great idea.
isn't it awesome?
We have a class, continuing education. I think most states have provided that course. It's conflict resolution. And a lot of jails have it too. They have the police have conflict resolution, continued ed too, and that's good. But we have them come and speak to our state associations about conflict resolution and how to handle and do it. The funny part is the guy that taught the class, I don't even remember his name. The one that really engineered this is from Wichita, Kansas. Her name was Brenda Dietzman, and she's known nationwide for that. And she's not in the police force anymore. She's retired. She's actually a speaker that goes around and speaks about stress management and stuff. Really good there. She's going to be a speaker in Vegas. But I love the way he presented it because he says, okay, what's going on here? And the policeman's asked this guy, and he said, my wife, she's such a witch, and she might have used the B word instead of the W word, but whatever. And he just said, and the officer said, I know exactly how you feel. And I thought, where's this going, And he says, my wife can be so difficult. And then the next thing you know, they're talking man to man or whatever you want to call it. It's not a policeman and they're talking about it. But it's still we got to figure this out. You can't do this and that. And I thought I've used that several times too. That and and my wife knows that I say that, and she says, "Okay, but we don't have that problem. Make sure that if you say that on the show, make sure they know we don't have a problem, and we don't. But I use that to identify with the problem, get empathetic, and get them, and then because if we're gonna really go toe to toe, well, let me loosen up here. I'm not got to loosen up here, and I try to make a joke about it and say, if we're gonna go that way, give me a little stretching time here. I'm an old fat man, and this and that. And the guy's like, I don't want to fight. Okay. That's what I use, And then I said, well, then let's talk about this. You can all listen. As long as you want to talk, I can listen all day long. And that's what you do. Then I even put the phone down. I just put the phone down. So let's talk about it. And sometimes they'll work it out. But you got to get the individual to recognize he has a problem, and he needs to say, really, she's not that bad of a person. We've just had a lot of problem at home. And when you get to the core of the problem, okay, now, and you don't suggest or you don't tell them what to do because they're going to clam up on you. So you let them talk through it, and you make it look like their idea. Well, what I hear you saying, I like using it. What I hear you saying is this job has really been stressful for you, and you need a little time to relax, and it should not be going to the bar and drinking. And he says, yeah, I could probably avoid doing it because that'll save you money is what I say. You're drinking in that bar, you're spending that money, that'll save you money. Maybe you ought to go just to the batting cage and swing a bat at a ball, you know what I mean? Or something, find something. Or go to the rec center and pump weights. Whatever it is that before you go home. Maybe that'll help you get rid of that stress. Things like that. Now, you can use whatever you want, but you kind of get the drift of what I'm saying. But the point is, the conflict resolution really is a good class. And I like the idea. I never thought about that because of course I don't go to a beauty shop, but when they're there, they hear all kinds of stories. And that is probably a great idea. I didn't even think of it. I think every state should have that
and I believe they are working on that. I know Illinois does it. I think Illinois may have been the first state to have mandated that. And then the person I actually interviewed her, she came up with a thing called the education program called Sheer Haven here in Tennessee. She had heard about Illinois and she pushed for that to happen in Tennessee. And I like that you guys have that conflict
Yeah.
resolution. And I hope I don't come across as seeming argumentative at all. But I will say that from the point of view as a former victim of domestic violence, I never called the police on my abuser. I never filed any report. So a lot of times for when these individuals do make it in front of a judge and they are given bond, there may have been a long history, potentially even years of abuse leading up to even just that first documented offense. And and I'm not going to say guys in terms of it's only men, but just these perpetrators, offenders, whatever, they're really good at manipulation, and they're really good at saying, "Oh yeah, that was my fault. I won't do it again," and just downplaying what they did. When again, in reality, there could have been years and years leading up to that first documented offense.
That's why we interview the family. Let me tell you, the person that I go into thinking about, they don't want people to know. And it makes me think of Rob Reiner and his wife when they got killed. The first time that anybody ever knew was the fight the night before at a party or something. I don't know the particulars. I just know, and I says, that's a typical thing. Right there, people should have said, wow, and be alerted. But Rob Reiner probably didn't want people to know that his son was a mess, and probably the brothers and sisters, they probably knew, but they didn't say anything because Rob Reiner probably told them, look, this is personal business. We don't want to air our laundry. Whenever you have something like that, you need to let somebody, and the preacher, when I say the preacher or the pastor or whatever, they're not going to tell people. They're not going to go out and air it to all your neighbors and friends. But if you're being, it's a syndrome, and we'll probably get close to the end of the time, but it's a syndrome that I always like, and I love this analogy of how to cook a frog. And when you take a frog and then you throw it in boiling water, what's it do? It hops right back out. I don't want to be here. But if you put the frog in there and slowly heat up the water, I know you know this, I can tell but people need to realize that is so much what happens to these women. They feel comfortable. I don't want a divorce because I don't know what I can't live without him because I need the money or the stability or whatever. So I'm going to just live through this, or I'm not going to get a divorce until the children are gone, or I'm not going to do this and that. But you could be playing with a very, very dangerous situation. It could end up in death. So you need to do that. And it can be anything to help. But that's when the people, when a friend comes to you and says, me and my husband are fighting, that's when you put down the phone, like I just said, I'm here to listen. And you listen. You don't tell them, well, I wouldn't do that. By God, I wouldn't tolerate this or that. You sit there and you listen, and then you use what I hear you saying is you'd like to find some help, but you're afraid to go in. Because if that friend came to you and talked to you and opened up, she really is needing help. And you're her friend. And to be her friend is listen. Don't tell them what to do. The recommendation is from them to themselves. What I hear you saying is, I think you'd like to do this, but you're afraid to do this. I will stand right there with you. Never say a word if you want to go somewhere and talk to somebody. I'll drive you there. I'll do this and that. But don't be the fix it. Be the supportive person. And I think I'm coming off right. I think you're shaking your head.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Because if that person came to you, you need to, I don't care. Maybe you don't even really care for the person, but they came with you with respect that they trusted, and trust is the big deal. And then say, I ain't telling anybody. It's not my story to tell. It's not my story to tell, but I will help you tell that story to somebody, or I'll get you there, or whatever. And that can be the best thing. And then when it's all said and done and something happens, you'll be surprised later on in life. They'll come back and say, you're my best friend. You helped me out of a bad situation. And lots of times we need to do that. Now, if the man comes to another man and he says, my wife I had to set her straight the other way. Now, again, you don't say, what? You don't do that. Oh, really? Man, that sounds like you got a lot of stress in your life. You want to sit down and talk about it? Let's get a cup of coffee or whatever, and we'll talk. And again, listen, and then say, okay, I'm worried about this situation. Are you thinking about divorcing her? Oh, yeah, or no. And then just, again, don't fix it. Try to get him to work through it, and maybe, maybe you ought to be talking to somebody more professional than your best friend here. Maybe so-and-so will help you, whoever, and do that. That way I feel that they've helped the person. They should feel good about helping their friend, because, sometimes they just need help. And a little bit of help now prevents a disaster later on in life. And that's what we need to be more in tune to doing.
Right, right. Be on the other end of, and be more proactive versus reactive. And yeah, it makes all the difference, I think, for a victim to be heard and to be believed, even if it's just one person that they barely know. That might just give them enough confidence to do what they need to do to make sure they're safe. I know we are kind of running low on time, but one of the questions I had, which I think that we answered, is what can we do to become more proactive versus reactive? And I suppose that phone, that app, is sort of reactive, because this is already, somebody has created an offense that they have that GPS tracker, but it's also a proactive to hopefully prevent further violence or even death. So I think that's a really, really cool technology that
I think every victim will be very supportive of that.
Yes.
We have to pass some legislation to get that. And the technology is going to get back better. It'll say he's 100 feet away, or he's one floor above you, or, in a mall or whatever. So it can say you need to. But then the victim's going to say, well, I shouldn't have to change the way I do things. No, but you're alerted. You've been told he's there. So you keep an extra eye out or whatever.
Yeah. And just a little extra, feeling a little bit more comfortable that they can go out and enjoy their lives and not stay locked up in a house, barricaded up in a house. Okay. So before we close up, I know you have some podcasts, but do you want to share your podcasts and any links or anything with listeners?
Well, yeah, we have Topo Padilla has one. Let's see, it's Sac Live, and he has a real good one. It comes out every Tuesday, and I think Sacramento may have that may be a radio show. I don't know, but he had a real good one, and he's a past president of PBUS. Then Ken Good, he has the Bell Post, and then we have one called Bail in the Midwest. And those are the 3 podcasts. They're all on YouTube, like yours is. There's others, but those are the 3 that I'm involved with, or kind of indirectly, but directly. But yeah, we talk about the different laws, the different situations. We've interviewed doctors and prosecutors and ex-judges and that, and you can go to those, and there's hundreds of them. But as far as domestic violence, and I think that's the focus that we're trying to do, Nina Solanero, now her sister was killed, and she's out of California, and I don't know the name of her podcast, but Nina's been on our show and talking about, she has a great program.
And does PBUS have a website that's available for anybody to take a look at to find out any information?
Yeah, it's PBUS.com.
That's easy.
Well, PBUS, Professional Bondsman United States, PBUS.com.
Okay, perfect. And to close up, do you have any lasting words of wisdom or advice that you would want to leave?
I hope everybody really understands that the victim is the victim, not the defendant. One of the things I will say this, if you've ever heard of anybody putting their hands around somebody's throat, that person is dangerous. He may have done it that time because he'll say something like, I can take you out at any time. The next time he may not stop. So if ever you hear of anybody ever putting their, and it could be just a gesture, that person has a problem. And I want to say that because I've heard that twice, and both times they killed somebody. So that would be my parting words, I guess. Don't ever, if you ever hear that, all flags should go up. They should talk about it.
Oh.
Okay.
All right. Well, David, thank you so much for your time and coming on.
Thank you.
Thank you again, David, for joining me today. And thank you, Warriors, for listening. I've included the links David was referring to, as well as his 1 in 3 profile, in the show notes. I will be back next week with another episode for you. Until then, stay strong. And wherever you are in your journey, always remember, you are not alone.
Find more information, register as a guest, or leave a review by going to the website 1in3podcast.com. That's the number 1, IN, the number 3, podcast.com. Follow 1 in 3 on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at 1 in 3 Podcast. To help me out, please remember to rate, review, and subscribe. 1 in 3 is a .5 Pinoy production. Music written and performed by Tim Crow.